everyone to the next unit in our course, which will be discussing worksheet techniques. Again, we talked about this at a basic level in the Introduction to Excel course, but we will be talking about more intermediate concepts, more complex concepts through the lens of an intermediate user. Now, the first thing that we're going to be talking about is inserting and deleting worksheets. Now, as you can see in this Excel workbook over here, which is the Excel cheat sheet, which you can access from meritcanz.com/Excel. This Excel workbook has a number of tabs in here, lots and lots of tabs. And we know that because we can either scroll across this way using our right and left buttons and see how many tabs there are, or we can right click on either one of those arrows and it'll give us a list of all the tabs that are in the workbook. And selecting on one of these will take us to that tab. Okay, so we know there's a number of Excel tabs. How do we add in more and delete more tabs? Well, the simplest way of doing that is to right click on any particular tab and then press Insert and press OK again. Now what this will do is add in a sheet, and based on the number of sheets, new sheets in the workbook already, it'll add a number after that. Because this is the first new sheet, it's going to call it sheet number 1. If we were to do that again and right click Insert again, it'll call it sheet 2. Now we can also add in multiple sheets at a time. All we have to do is select a particular cell, worksheet, hold down our Shift key, and then we can select a range. So let's say we want to add in 5 new sheets. So we're going to select 5 tabs over here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And holding down our Shift key, we're going to left click, and it's going to select the range of worksheets in between. We now have 5 worksheets selected, and we're going to right click, Insert in the same way we did before. What this will do is it'll now add in 5 worksheets, as you can see over here. And it's added a number based on the number of new sheets there are in this workbook. So because there's sheet 1 and 2, it's saying sheet 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so that's one way of adding in new sheets. Another way of doing it, which is very quick and easy, is we can hold down the Control button and just drag the tab like so. So if I hold down Control key, hold down the left click button and move it over here. So 2 things you'll notice. One thing is the little arrow popping up, which between those little tabs, which tells you where you're going to drop it. And the second thing is you've got this little symbol on the left mouse button, which looks like a little page with a plus symbol on it, meaning we're going to create a new one. So if I copy this across here, it's going to create an exact copy of that tab. Now notice how in this instance it's not going to say sheet 8. The reason is we're not inserting a new tab, we're copying an existing tab. So let's just redo that and let's create an existing tab like this one and see what happens. So if we hold down Control and copy it, you'll see now it's called Clean 2, which means it's the exact same tab, but it's had to add in the 2 to indicate that it's a second tab. We can't have the same name twice, or it's going to impact Excel formulas in terms of knowing where to look. But you know when we copied this, it's exactly the same. We've just copied this tab. Okay, so the next thing that I want to show you is deleting tabs. So we're going to, it's the exact same way, we're just going to right click a tab and we're going to go delete. Alternatively, we can select multiple tabs, so let's select this range over here, right click and delete. Okay, now these are all gone from the Excel file. The next thing I want to show you is another way of moving or copying tabs. So let's just delete these as well. Okay, so the next way we're going to do is, and as I mentioned before, it's a very long Excel workbook. So how do we move a tab from here all the way to the end? Well, one way of doing it is just dragging the tab. So if we want to move this tab here, we're just going to left click, hold down our left click, and suddenly our arrow has appeared as per last time, which tells us where the tab is going to be dropped if we let go. And it's also got this little symbol here on the mouse click, which is a page. This time it doesn't have the plus symbol, which means we're going to move it, not create a new one. So if I move it here and let go, the tab is going to move from here to over here. Alright, but what about if we want to move it right to the end, which is going to be heaps and tabs we're going to need to move past. So one option is we just drag it all the way and hold it to the right hand side of the screen, As we do that, Excel will automatically filter through all the tabs. But it's going to take a while, right? So there's a faster way of doing this. Basically, how we do this is we right-click the tab and we go Move or Copy. If we click this, it gives us a few different options. So number one is, which Excel book do we want to move it to? So the first option is we can move it to a new workbook, so Excel will create a totally new book. Or the current name of the book. So as you can see, this name here is the same as the name up the top of the page. So if I select that, it's going to move it to a location within this workbook. The other option, which isn't popping up now, is if I had another Excel workbook open, it would also give me the option of moving to that other Excel workbook. But I'm going to select this Excel workbook. The next option we're going to get is where in the workbook do we want to move it to. So you'll notice it says before sheet. So wherever we click, it's going to move it before that tab. So if I click value, it's going to go in between upper and value. If I want to move it to the very last tab, you click this option here, which says move to the end. Now the final choice is whether or not we want to create a copy. So there's two options. One is we just move the tab, which means it's going to disappear from here and move to the end. To do that, I would click OK. The second option is to create a copy, and that would look like this tab would stay here, but it's going to create the exact same tab all the way at the end, but with a 2 at the end. So let's just move it first. Let's click OK, and as you'll see, the tab's been moved to the end. And let me just show you what it looks like if we create a copy. So we're just going to go move to end, press OK, and now you'll see the same tab name but with a 2 at the end. So let's delete that. Let me just quickly show you what it looks like if we move to a new workbook as well. So I'm going to go new workbook. I'm going to create a copy because I don't want to delete it from here. If I untick that, then it's going to delete it from this workbook. So let's press create a copy, press OK, and now it's been populated in this new workbook which Excel has just created called Book 1, and it's the only tab in there. So that's moving tabs around in Excel. We've talked about copying. Now we'll talk about moving. Let's talk about renaming a worksheet. So there's a few ways we can do it. So the quickest way is just to double click on the tab, and then you can just straight type your new name of the tab. I generally recommend that you don't put any spaces in there. The reason is, whilst it's not going to be the end of the world if you do, if you ever do some if or other formulas which link into this tab, it can confuse Excel sometimes because this space character can be converted into other characters by Excel sometimes. So if you do want to include a space, just put a dot or something in between where the tab would have been, and you should be fine. So it's saying new tab. The other way we can do this is we can right click the tab and just press rename, and that'll get you to the same field here where you can type in something. So you can also rename multiple tabs. You can just right click, rename, blah blah blah, right click, rename, blah blah blah, and so forth. The next thing that I want to talk about is navigating worksheets. So we mentioned before that you could click one of these ones, these little arrows over here, and that will allow you to scroll in between each of the different tabs in the workbook. You could then select the relevant tab and keep scrolling, etc. So that's one way of doing it. If you don't have enough space in here, for example, if your Excel looks like this by default, what you can do is you can drag this little thing over here, like so, and give yourself some more room for scrolling through the tabs. There's also a little hidden thing in here, which is a new sheet, which you can create a new sheet, which I didn't mention before, if you prefer to do it that way. But what I want to show you is if I want to quickly get to a tab at the beginning of the workbook, right-click on one of these arrows, select the tab from the list. This is all the tabs you have in your workbook. Let's say I want to go to the first workbook. Let's select that and we'll press OK. And now Excel is going to take me straight to that tab. So it's a quick way of navigating through your Excel workbook. Next, we will talk about hiding and unhiding worksheets. So just because you see all of these tabs doesn't mean it's a complete list of all the tabs in your workbook. For example, if you're working off a file that someone has sent you from your finance team, they may have some back-end calculations to show you this output, which they don't necessarily want you to see or edit or change. So what they'll do is they'll hide a tab. You can still view those tabs, and the way you do that is you right-click on any tab in here, right-click, and you'll see an option over here, hide and unhide. Because this is grayed out, what this means is that there's no hidden tabs in this workbook. So the way, if I was in the finance team and I wanted to hide my calculation workbook, I would right click this and press hide. Now all of a sudden you can no longer see that workbook in here if you're opening up the Excel file. But you can still link to that file, you can still use formulas, everything will still work, it's just not accessible by clicking on it. There is a way of viewing those unhidden tabs, so all you have to do is just right click on any tab over here, so here, press unhide, and now Excel is going to give you a list of all the tabs in here that are hidden. So you simply click on the sheet that you want to unhide and press OK. So unfortunately there's no way of mass unhiding tabs. If you right click a range of tabs and press hide, you can hide multiple ones, but to unhide them it's a little bit slow. You got to manually right click, unhide, and so forth. There are Excel add-ins that you can get online which can allow you to speed it up using the use of macros. I have one up here myself which I use. There's an option up here which says unhide all sheets, but by default you won't be able to have this macro in your workbook. You're going to have to right click, manually unhide tabs, which is a little bit slow and a bit surprising by Excel, but one of the current limitations of Excel. Hopefully they fix that in a future version. Okay, so we talked about copying a sheet to another workbook. Okay, changing worksheet tab colors. I'll show you this best practice model template because what they've done is they've allocated each of their different tabs in a different color. So as you can see down the bottom, we've got our inputs as one color, we've got our calculations as one color, our backend as another color, and our output sheets as another color. And it's similar to what we discussed in earlier chapters about, cell styles. It's just a way of keeping your Excel workbook really neat, a lot easier to read, and basically making the user experience improved. Now, why would you color code certain tabs? Well, it's so no one makes the accidental confusion between what is an output and an input, so they don't actually override an output cell. It's so that they know that something you're using is source data, so they can look through that and see that you've actually summarized that data and it wasn't how it was presented to you. It's so that people know straight away which cells they have to input. So we've got yellow ones for inputs over here, and anyone who opens that up straight away knows to go to any yellow cell and change the values in here and not touch anything else. It's a good way of logically separating your workbook as well. So for you thinking, okay, I need all my calculations here and all my outputs over here, it's just a good logical formula for a good quality output, and less likely to make mistakes as well. And finally, there are reasons why to do it for speeds of your workbook as well. So the way Excel works is if you put heavy data sets at the back of your workbook, like over here, it's actually going to improve the speed of the workbook that you're operating at. Excel allocates more memory to the front cells. So if you've got less intensive worksheets at the front, your Excel is going to work a lot faster than it typically does. Of how to actually change the color of a tab, simply right click the tab that you want to allocate, right click here, go tab color, and you can choose any color you want, and you can customize it over here as well. Choose any color over here. What I like to do in my Excel workbooks is I actually put divided tabs in. So these are blank tabs, so we just right click, insert new tab. So we might call it source data like that, and then color code it a certain color like so. And then you can put all the data you've been provided by a client or a customer over here, and so that anyone who opens it knows that these are the sources. And I'm just going to hold down Control, drag this over here and say, this is my output, like so. Maybe color code that orange, just so everyone knows exactly what's in those cells. And another way of doing it is you can also put in a numerical reference. So let's say our output's number 1 at the front. It means if we've ever got a workbook where we need the same tab multiple times, for example, revenue, you might have a workbook, you might have a calculation tab for revenue and an output tab for revenue. It means you can also differentiate between the same tab and just call it one rev, and then you can also have the same tab over here for one output, or maybe even a source rev. So if our source is number 2, then we can call this one number 2 rev. And now you can call the tab the exact same thing, which is rev, but you can also know whether that relates to the source or the output and so forth. So just a little bit of a best practice tip there. The next thing we'll talk about is grouping worksheets. So I mentioned before how you could select a few different tabs within a workbook by holding down the Shift key and selecting Arrange, or holding down the Control key and selecting individual cells. And that way you can quickly copy or delete those cells in the group. Now if you right click, and you'll see now options, ungroup sheets, and then it'll unselect those cells. Or you can just click out of it like so. Now just be really careful when you do have a number of tabs grouped together. The reason is any change that you make to the tabs while grouped will happen across all of those tabs. So it can be a really powerful way of duplicating changes automatically, or it could be a way where you accidentally make changes which you didn't know were happening, which can screw up your workbook. So it can be a pro or a con depending on how you look at it, but most importantly you need to be aware of this. So for example, if I'm selecting this range of cells here and they're now grouped because I've got them all selected, I'm going to color them a certain color, yellow, so you can see they're all yellow now, so I can tell that they're grouped. So what happens is if I put a value in cell JI and maybe select this whole range and put in the value, I don't know, 100, and press Control Enter, which means it applies across the entire selection. See what happens in my other tabs. So see how all these other tabs in that exact same cell range, I've got 100 in here. Now that could be the same instance if I highlight a certain range and format it red text. Notice all these tabs will now have the exact same formatting. So you could have accidentally done that by selecting all of those and didn't know you've had them selected, and made a change to one tab, and then later when you check these tabs you've got these random values across the page. It's because you had them grouped, that's why. But in another instance, this could be really handy. So let's go Insert, New Worksheet, and move it to a new workbook. Let's say we want to create the same template over and over. Maybe we want to create a few copies of this. Let's copy this, move to the end. So now I've got 4 sheets over here. I'm going to group them, and I'm going to copy this template over here. Because these are grouped, as soon as I paste this over here, it's going to apply to all the sheets, and now I could use this potentially as a template to roll out across all of them without having to copy 4 times. So it could be a quick way of doing it. The next thing I'm going to be talking about is hiding rows and columns and grouping them as well. So you should be aware of how to hide in rows and columns by now, since you've passed the basic course, as this is one of the topics we talked about. But in short, how you can do it is select your rows like so that you want to hide. So I'm going to hide these columns over here because it's too old of a financial period. And then just right click and hide those. Now, there's a lot of dangers for doing so, doing it like that. The reason is someone who's going to open up this workbook, they're going to come along this file and they go equals sum. I'm just going to select, the whole range like so. Right? They're thinking that they're only going to sum up these numbers over here. But what they're getting instead is a number of 600 million. But they didn't even realize that because it's hidden. And they didn't know there was a hidden row. They thought there was blank values in there. So it's actually picking up these values in their sum as well. So to avoid a situation like that, instead of hiding, which you may need to do for real, genuine reasons, we're going to use grouping function instead. So we're going to select the columns that we want to group, and we're going to go to the Data tab, and we're going to go Group. Press that button up there. You'll notice now that we've got this little gray line over here which tells you which selection is grouped, and you've got this little minus symbol over here. So basically what happens is, this is a button. If you click this, those cells are going to be hidden as they were before, but it's also really obvious to anyone opening up this workbook that you've got this grouped cell there, so they're not going to miss that. They know how to look out for that. And you'll notice down the side here in this model, you've also got all these detailed rows being grouped as well. So what we can do is we can either see it in the detail or we can just minimize it and see the total. So it's a really good way of like hiding your cells in a way that's not going to be missed, etc. There's also this function up here where you can just press the 2 button to expand all of the groupings down there, or 1. And same for this, you press the 2, and it's going to minimize all of your groupings at once. Sorry, expand, and 1 minimizes all of your groupings at once. If you've got multiple layers of groupings, let's say you want to, within project cash flows, you want to group these as well. You can have 2 different layers. Notice how that there's now a 3 there. That's basically the level. So if you press 3, everything's expanded. If you press 2, everything except the 3rd level is expanded. And if you press 1, everything is contracted. You can also ungroup everything, so just do it in the same way. Select your range and then press ungroup, and now all of your groupings have disappeared. You can also do this, show detail, hide detail. So basically what that does is the same as expanding these ones. It's the same as pressing the 2 button in there. You can hide the detail in there, or you can expand it by pressing these buttons. So that's Excel grouping rows and columns, and why you should be doing that instead of hiding. So never hide any row or Excel or column in your Excel workbook. Otherwise, you might get someone else in trouble. Okay, that's everything for worksheet techniques. Look forward to the next video with you on finding and replacing data in Excel.